we're back to LTP, and I believe today we're into revenue and financing.
All right, thank you. So there's two sides to an LTP. The first side is what are we going to do? What are we going to deliver? What is it going to cost? And that's the fun side. This is the side of where does the money come from? How we're going to pay for things. So we've got a suite of revenue and financing policies. There's a revenue and finance policy that sits at the top. That goes essentially by activity through how will they be funded. And the other one is how do we use particular types of revenues. That's then supported by a funding impact statement, which has got the details. Actually, how do we set rates? Where are the boundaries for particular rates? What valuation system do we use? That's all in the funding impact statement. And then we've got a fees and charge schedule that sets the individual fees for different types of users at the pool, for example. There's also the development contributions policy, which is about how do we fund growth projects. And we've got a rates remissions policy. Today, we're just going to cover the big one, the revenue and finance policy, and sort of by default, the funding impact statement and the fees and charges schedule, which are what implement it, really. So we'll be coming back at a later workshop to talk about development contributions policy and rates remissions policy. Fair enough for now. All right, we'll get straight into it. Revenue finance policy, what is it? As I said, it sets out how we fund our various activities, really at an activity by activity basis. And your decisions there are generally, do we fund it through rates on everyone? Do we fund it on rates on a particular area of the district or a particular type of property? Or do we fund it through fees and charges for the use of that particular service? It also talks about what do we do with some of our other revenues, like investment revenues or proceeds of asset sales, and when we'll use borrowing. Supported also by our financial strategy and our treasury management policy. So there's a whole suite of revenue policies. There are some rules that we're required to follow or think about. We're required to consider them, to be specific. This is all set out in the Act. So when we're thinking about how we fund a particular activity, dogs is quite a good example. How do we fund our dog control activities, our pound, and our officers who go out there and make sure everyone's going to be safe? We've got to look at who benefits from the activity. Is it the community as a whole? Is it a particular part or area of the community or a particular type of properties, as I said? Or is it particular individuals? So for dogs, the classic example, we say everyone benefits because you can walk around your streets and you can feel relatively safe. If you have a problem, you've got something to call. And then you talk about who causes the harm or the need for it. You could argue that people who choose to have dogs mean that bad dogs in particular, mean that we have to provide a service to manage dogs. And then you talk about what is administratively feasible. Can we actually identify the particular benefits? Is it worthwhile trying to collect the money directly from them? Playgrounds, for example, we can't charge people every time they want to go use a playground. They're just there, people come and go as they please. So even though the benefit is that people who use them, can we really identify them? Can we really charge them? Or is it just out there? And then after you do that, and you kind of do that activity by activity, you look at the overall picture and you go, are we collecting money from the right type of people in the community? Are we achieving our social, economic, environmental and cultural well-beings? Or some people skating through this, they've somehow missed all the policies and they're not contributing like we think they should contribute as a community. Does that all make sense? Well, Section 1013 it's a view. So revenue and finance policy, again, we go through activity by activity, and for each activity, it really starts with what is the cost to council of providing the service. And we haven't done that activity yet. So we'll largely be talking about what our current policies are. There's an exercise to go through to see where have our costs changed and where might we have to change how we fund things because costs have changed. But you start with what does it cost to provide the activity? And then you look at, in partnership, what are sort of acceptable fees if you're going to fund it through fees to set? And then what is the right balance if you're trying to collect revenue from different users? What is the right balance between the wider community and particular users? So the pools is a good example where we'll talk about what is the right fee to set to enter the pool. If you set it too high, you might even lose revenue because people stop going. If you set it too low, then you find out that the whole community is paying for the pool. A number of those people in the community won't use the pool. Is that fair? So that's the balancing act you need to go through, those three things. Now we're going to get into them line by line. The first two are general. They're about how do we fund capital and operating. There's important distinctions there. So capital, you'll know, we fund through borrowing. In the annual plan, we've got about 17 million in borrowing in there for about a 60 million capital program. Depreciation reserves, in the annual plan for this year again, we're going to spend about 31 million from our depreciation reserves. About half of that's renewals, half of that's on new stuff. Development contributions for growth, and then any financial reserve returns we might have in there, sale of assets as well. Any surplus operating income, which was something that used to exist, but I don't think exists anymore. Given council's costs have dramatically increased and we're trying to keep rates down. Operating expenditure, again, for the annual plan for this year, we've got about 120 million in operating costs, including depreciation, which, as you see, goes to fund capital, and 120 million in revenue. About 90 of that is from rates, so the vast majority comes from rates. Fees and charges make up about 12 million. And the other is little bits and pieces. We get some interest on some of our reserves, a little bit of money from NZTA for maintenance on roads, and there's some other things. But 90 million from rates, 12 million from fees and charges. That's sort of the overall balance picture that you might want to keep in your mind.
Take questions as we go through.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, good. So, just a quick question, and excuse my ignorance on this. Depreciation reserves, you said that that was for renewals and new stuff. So just an understanding of how that reserve fund fits. So if it's 100% up until recently, our depreciation, I'm thinking that would be on existing assets. So if that's the case, how is that money allocated? It just goes into a general pool, or is it allocated to a specific asset as we go through?
So depreciation reserves, the main inflow into a depreciation reserve is our rating for depreciation.
Yeah.
And then we use that reserve to fund renewals and loan repayments. We don't normally use it for new assets. There might be on occasion that we might, but we generally loan fund a new asset and then repay the loan from the reserves. And we have a variety of reserves, as we talked about last year, that service different parts of the operation. So you've got the water reserve that funds water renewals, and the building reserve that funds building renewals.
And so forth. Just so I understand, so if we're asked, how come the depreciation reserve money is being used for a new capital expenditure, how does that work? That was
Yeah.
kind of
It's not normal.
not normal. I think you.
So when you said, when I heard that, I interpreted that to mean a new capital expenditure on, say, a new piece of infrastructure that's replacing something old that's worn out. So that's how sort of I interpret it. You know, like rather a brand new wastewater plant out in Kinloch. In addition, this is how I, correct me if I'm wrong, rather than that, I interpret it to mean, oh, well, the wastewater plant in Kinloch is totally shot. Just got to replace, smash it down and replace it. That's a depreciation. That's what I heard when you said it. Does that sound about right?
It's a renewal, but it is unlikely that we would let a plant get to a point where we have to knock it down and start again.
Yeah.
Because we do, renewals occur throughout the life of the asset to keep it up at the level it needs to be to provide the level of service that we've promised. So that's what a renewal does. It keeps the asset where it's meant to be.
Yes, yeah. But when you said, well, funding capital expenditure from depreciation reserves, are you saying you are actually meaning you might fund that extra piece of infrastructure out there, which is not a renewal, not replacing anything. It's just, so you might actually do that sometimes.
Or we pay back a loan and then retake the loan for the new thing.
It's paying the loan back, which is in effect paying for the asset, but it's spreading it over the generations and over the life of the asset.
So there's two things there. The first is the operating side. So we're required to recognise depreciation as an operating expense. That reflects that the current community is using up assets as they age and wear and tear. So we're required to fund that. That's where we make a decision that we will put 100% of that depreciation. We will fund it through rates. We'll put it in a depreciation reserve. Then we've got a separate funding policy which says what can we use the depreciation reserve for? And we primarily use it for renewals, paying back loans and all the things we've built, but we're also free to spend it on new capital according to the policy. So,
But we generally don't.
The UAG again.
that's the next one. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Just explain how that.
Okay, so now we're going to get into our different types of rates. So the first one is the UAGC, if you like acronyms, Uniform Annual General Charge. So this is a charge that everybody in the community, every property pays. And it's currently $250. So everybody pays that regardless of the value of your property, how big your house is, how many people live there. So little grandma in a 1-bedroom unit pays $250. 5-person family in a big expensive house also pays $250. They all pay the same. That's exactly what it is, uniform charge across all properties. It's been $250 for some time. Actually 11 years we had a look. And we've not changed that. And part of the reason of keeping that low is the burden on grandma relative to your big family. Or potentially there's an argument for who is the wealthy who can afford to pay. And that's captured by the valuation of the property. But
Have you put that up?
we've not put that up. There's
No,
no proposal
if
for
you
that.
did,
If you
would
put
the
it,
general rate come down?
well, it would, but if you keep it low, it means that the burden on the lower valued homes is lower. They won't pay as much.
More
Choose up a
realistically,
lot of their
you're
rates.
talking about where you put up rates. Would you put it up through the uniform charge where everybody pays the same $20? Or would you put it up on the general rate basis where bigger households pay more and smaller households pay less?
You're shifting the burden from capital to a flat rate, basically.
Yeah.
So,
And-
And that's a policy decision.
And currently we use this charge, which is flat fee for everybody, primarily for our governance, leadership, advocacy role.
So if you want to raise, that's what we put it up.
So it's supposed to fund 100% of that. Interestingly, again, we haven't adjusted it in 12 years, so it'll be a bit of an exercise to see if it still funds that 100%.
Julie from Whakatane, what would you say?
So they actually moved the UAGC on an annual basis. They tied it to a percentage of the capital rates. But the activities that it's intended to cover are tending to be those where you've got 100% public benefit. So that the idea is that you can't actually distinguish who's actually adding more user pays to those. And so we kind of go from a theoretical perspective, work backwards. In theory, 100% of those will be set by that amount. Then you set the UAGC.
So the time to put it up a bit.
So UAGC, I think in Whakatane was about 286 or close to 300.
So in our space, same principle, the things that everyone benefits sort of equally. We've got emergency management, of course, that's everyone. And then leadership, governance, advocacy, where we act on behalf of everyone.
We'll review it as part of our review of our policy.
Okay.
And that's a discussion you can have about what is the appropriate way to set that. And we'll look at whether or not it is funding 100% of these and come back with some advice on that.
That would be a helpful figure, the percentage of coverage for what it's intended for.
Yeah.
Actually, all of those, an actual breakdown of the actual numbers would be quite interesting, rather than just be words, it's covered,
Yeah.
Can we get that?
You can once we've done our budgeting and our costs, which we haven't done yet, which is why we don't do it now. But that's exactly the point. We start with the cost. We start with who do you think would pay, and then what would the charge be? Does that all balance? What do we need to adjust?
But what I've taken from this conversation is we'll do the theoretical exercise on those costs and we'll come back to you with a decision on UAGC. Since was reviewed.
Yeah. Remember, councillor body used to be high in this. Which way?
He wanted to put, I think he wanted to put everything under the UAGC, which is not,
Can't actually do.
can't actually do that.
There is a legal limit on how much of your revenue you can do that.
So UAGC plus your targeted rate should not exceed 30% of your total rates take.
What is it?
I think it's probably because
It is pretty low.
it might be half that.
Yeah.
So that's right. General rates. This is where you pay according to the value of your property. So a big property or large capital value on a big house, you pay more. And in part that's to represent either your wealth or the size of your household and how much you might be using services, right? So it's kind of a proxy for a lot of things, our general rate, our valuation. So that funds transport 100%, parks and revenues 100%, swimming pools, what isn't captured by fees, our event centres, halls, museum, library, again, whatever isn't captured by fees, 100% of stormwater, public toilets and public rubbish bins, 100%, housing for the elderly, again, what isn't covered by rents, destination marketing, community engagement, policy and planning, and our grants that we have. Anything on that before we move on?
Yes, can I just ask a question? Do we get any subsidy of any sort from the government for housing for the elderly? Nothing at all.
No.
There's nothing available.
I believe we're not
So-
entitled as a council provider to
Under
government
the-
subsidies.
Under the legislation, apologies, under the legislation, councils are excluded from providing rent subsidy. So that's part of the reason why housing subgroup would be community housing.
So those community housing people, they would be
Yes.
eligible for that sort of thing. So it seems a no-brainer that we can set up our own organisation and no, we can't do it. There's visuals, okay.
So that's what councils are getting out of
Yeah,
this sort of thing.
yeah, absolutely, and who can blame them?
There's a history to that and context, and that's that the largest landlord in the country is Wellington City Council,
Oh, cool.
and the government doesn't fund something that already is being provided.
Yeah.
So they're trying to fund you more, not fund councils for something that already exists.
And it's-
So they've got a lot of fish hooks to try and stop them taking on that burden.
Destination marketing. So we fund that 100% now. It used to be commercial ratepayers used to pay slight differential, do they, or not?
There is a differential for general rates, and I'll try and explain that a little bit.
But are we going to go through each of the activities and talk at that level of detail?
Not for that one, because it's covered by general rates. We'll go through the ones with their own specific funding. So this is the time for that conversation. No, currently it's 100% funded through general rates.
Yeah.
And their commercial, accommodation, industrial, they pay a differential which adjusts how much they pay for their valuation. But part of that's to reflect that their valuation might be low relative to a house. So if I think about a motel, a 30-bedroom motel might be valued at about $4 million, but is obviously providing a hell of a lot more than 4 or 5 houses in terms of demand. So we apply a differential to adjust how much they pay relative to that quite low valuation of how much services they use.
Just
So-
on the general rate.
Through the general rate, yeah. So it's all captured through the differential. We don't target that towards specifically commercial or accommodation, Airbnbs or.
And what's the level of the differential?
1.8.
1.8.
And then is that 1.8 number, is that used for, based on the activity? Motel,
Commercial and
a factory, an industrial, what,
It's the same figure for industrial, commercial and accommodation. And it's to balance out how much we think they use of these services relative to their value.
also like a warehouse, run by 5 staff people would pay differential of 1.8.
Yeah, it's
Really?
potentially it's got quite a low valuation, but it's still using a lot of
Oh.
transport networks.
Yeah. Okay, it's a pretty rough short way of doing it.
It's a simplistic way of doing it.
Oh, and that 1.8, look, that's quite important. That's something we can change if we want, can't we? Well, that's a pretty fundamental thing that we can.
You can change it, but then it's a zero-sum game, right? If you change that, then you've got to find the money from somewhere else. If you put it up, then you're benefiting someone else. Still collecting the same pot of money. Who you choose it from is all zero-sum games. So you're just going to create winners and losers without necessarily.
So if you made it 3, okay. With so are we, by making it 3, well, okay, you make them a commercial, pay a lot more. Are we reducing the residential by doing that? Because is that how it works?
Well, you'd set it to collect a pot of money. So if you set it at 3, then you wouldn't have to set the residential property as high, right?
All right, yes. So you'd relieve the residential and hammer the business. So that's okay.
So differentials is something that Sarah is reviewing, and we'll come back and have a chat about this later.
Because I imagine they vary around the country a little bit, radically, or just sort of.
I haven't looked into it.
Oh,
Okay. So activity by activity, it's a bit hard to see there. The first one is rubbish. So obviously that's going to change because we're completely changing we might completely change our services. Our costs will change completely no matter what we do. It's currently 100% funded through fees through the charge on bags. With the recycling and the bins, they're funded about around that 50% through tip fees, and the rest through general rates. No, they're not, they're targeted rates. They're targeted because everyone pays a fixed charge, but commercial pays more. All right, so that will all be reviewed and we'll come back in that, and that will be part of our rubbish package. What are we going to provide? How are we going to pay for it? Animal control. So that's one that's funded a little bit from the UAGC and around 30 to 50% from dog fees. And that's one that we regularly review our dog fees for to sort of be in line with that policy. So I guess I'm going to go through these. I'm going to talk about what sort of current position is, and we really look at feedback. Is there anything in particular you think you'd like advice on changing? Is there anything you go, hey, this feels wrong? Can we have a look at that? Otherwise, we kind of assume that the existing policy is what we're going with.
What is interested in animal control?
Yeah.
Just to say, why should people who don't own animals pay for people who controlling people who do? I suppose you could look at it like that, couldn't you? Is that
You can, and this is the example, and this is reasonably standard around the country where they say the wider public benefits and being protected from dogs, but also the people who choose to have dogs cause the cost, so they've gone 50-50. You could argue that one, whichever way you like. I agree. But that's reasonably standard, I think, around the country. That our housing for the elderly units, again, it's somewhere around that 50-50 mark. I think we're towards the lower end of the band, maybe 40% at the moment coming through rates. And that's one that I think we do regularly review each year, but we sort of only put it up by inflation. Water and wastewater.
So I think now about, but there's some, not having the debate necessarily on change, but some that council wishes to investigate further. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Are there any areas where you go, oh,
actually, we'd like you to go.
we'd like more advice on this? What are our options? That's right. Otherwise, we'll obviously do a review, see if the charges and costs are still going to sit within the bands that we've got. But we'll look to sit within the current policy unless we identify a problem.
So you're looking for guidance about go away and investigate that particular.
Correct.
Well, I mean, on that, there are 3 on that page alone, 2 which are already doing that, and 1 which who knows where it will go based on the election.
Yeah.
Sorry, good luck with your exercise.
Water and wastewater. Yeah. So again, most of that's charged as a fixed rate per property. So basically every household, despite the size, pays the same for those. But we do have a pan charge or a toilet charge for non-households, depending on how many toilets they have. So that sort of hits schools, it hits Marai. It's one that iwi have in particular identified that they feel stung by, and they've asked us to review. So that's something we'll be looking at to see what our options are.
It's medical centres.
Medical centres? I was wondering. Yeah, okay. And we've got some water meter charges in some areas. Next one, compliance activities. That's building compliance, building inspections, Resource Management Act stuff, resource consents. So most of that, or a good chunk of that, is funded through fees, and the rest comes from general rates. Town centre Taupō, that's one we've got a targeted rate for the Taupō CBD, 100% of that.
Acknowledge I'm not a linked member, but I guess compliance activities is the only thing that we wish to debate in that one, because I imagine that some of the activities within that area are set at different levels. There's public benefit, obviously, in terms of some of our developments. I'm not saying that at all, but some of the activities within there have probably got a higher private benefit.
Yeah, I just realised I haven't actually got policy written, but yeah, we split it down by the different activities of building, resource consents, liquor licensing and compliance functions, and the percentages are different.
So potentially we're saying that some of those activities are only getting 70% cost back on fees, and that 30% of the activities will be funded because of their public benefit.
Yeah.
So you're just highlighting that.
Well, is the time to ask questions now?
Yes, please.
I've got 3 questions. The first one is that with the current process that we're going through with waste recycling, that cost, which for me is $200 and something, I think, on my rates bill, that cost will be removed from the rates, and it will be incorporated into the general rate, or will it still be specified on the actual rate?
That's something we'll be working through.
We're working through on that one, okay.
So in tandem, we'll be looking at what is the service we provide and what is the option.
Right.
What to be with.
Because at present, we can see what it is, obviously, yes. And we had that discussion the other day about, I think it was Councillor Shepherd saying, well, actually, if it's going to be incorporated into your rates, well, you won't see it any longer, which that might be a bit of an issue for some people. They might like to actually see what the waste costs are going to be. The other thing about the 50% subsidy for the housing for the elderly. Now, the government provides accommodation supplements for people in rental properties. So I'm wondering why we are subsidising housing for the elderly when we could actually have an increased cost, and people such as these people in rental accommodation could be applying for accommodation supplements.
They all do.
They can't.
They all do.
Why not?
I can answer that. When and that was a comment before about Wellington City Council. If you're in council-owned residential property, you are not eligible for that. And even if, and so this is part of the conversation in the housing strategy, sorry for digressing here, even if we took the council-owned residential units and put them into a CHIP, so a community housing provider, the current tenants would still be ineligible. It would only be through those people moving out and new people moving in would they become eligible for the subsidy. So it's really tight, it's well controlled, and there's no loophole we can jump through. And trust me, we've been down this road. And
He's with Jamie.
Don't we get an accommodation stuff?
Still access as individuals through.
Yeah.
But we can't do more.
it's really tight.
Oh, no, we can't.
Oh,
But
yeah.
you know, okay, that's the point that I was making, that if we increase the rental on it to the level where it's difficult for someone on the GRI of, you know, 300 something a week, there's nothing to stop them from applying for accommodation supplement through WINS.
That I would suggest they all get,
I mean, that's my.
but I don't know, Kevin.
They don't get it if it's council provided. So they've locked us out of the system.
They don't, they become not eligible.
We have explored this in detail.
They will get, just say a pensioner would just get a pension, that's it.
Yeah.
They don't get an accommodation supplement. Okay, that's.
Just, I was actually happened to talk to someone in Wellington about this very topic. It was a phone call about something else, but he's involved in the community groups with this because that's a big issue down there. He mentioned he mentioned a warning up here because I mentioned we're looking at it. By the way, you know these sort of supplement or these things that they can apply for.
Yeah.
By the way, that is not a bottomless pit. The government is drawing the line. They're not just saying anyone can apply.
Yeah.
Because it's more relevant, but down there you can't just sort of shove it off and expect these all people are going to get the supplement because we're giving away everywhere else. No, there's limited funds. So
they
anyway.
clearly exclude people who are in council accommodation.
well, it excludes them now, but don't just assume because you farm them off to a private thing that they're just going to get it because the government's going to draw the line, start drawing the line anyway.
Okay, that was the thing. And the third question is, which is a bit of a hardy annual for me from day one, I don't understand why the Turangi Town Centre has not got a targeted rate on its CBD, because it can sure as heck need it. And the landlords down there, I feel it's possibly time for them to have a look at a contribution for that area. I know that local people are concerned about the fact that it's not looking tidy in terms of being cleaned as often as it should be, and that there are things about there that could be done better. So I don't see why the poor old town centre Taupo people get targeted and we don't.
At the moment, the target in Taupo funds, Town Centre Taupo, the little organisation, which
Yeah.
is a collective that works on
Yeah.
behalf of businesses.
Yeah.
We don't have a similar collective in Turangi.
No, maybe it's time we encourage people to be a little bit more actively involved in that environment there. And, there's a committee down there at present, I know, that's been set up, so it might be something that actually we also have talked to them through the co-governance, might be an opportunity to talk about them. So those are my 3 questions. Thank you very much.
Just before I flip to the next page, Julie raised a really good point on the compliance activities. Some of these are very private benefit. You think about Building Act controls. Then to make sure when you build a house, it's safe for you to inhabit. Our maximum collection through fees is only 70%. So we're keeping our fees low and funding that through the community by choice, I guess, in a sort of open business frame of mind. But that's probably unusual throughout the country, I would imagine. The other ones, things like consent compliance is slightly different because you're trying to protect the wider community from harms that could happen from a build. There's noise, dust, heights, shading, all that sort of thing. So there is wider public benefit in those things. So there is a little interesting mix in that that you may want to consider.
Right, so just on that, that would be helpful to have that broken down to the, not a fine level of granularity, but the broadly chunked down into this is building,
It
this
is in the
is health,
policy.
this is parking, this is, and I'm thinking there'll be some crossover with animal control because there's compliance issues there as well, but understanding that the different buckets within that and what the percentages are would be helpful.
We'll highlight that when we come back to the.
The current revenue and financing policy does go into more detail than
Yep,
this, sort them by activity.
Oh, just through the chair, that this would be the chance to bring up bed tax, I suppose, wouldn't it? Because that's a,
We'll be talking about that the latter half of today.
Depending on how much power we get. It's a very ambitious
Later on today.
agenda, and we might come back next week with half of it. We'll just see how we go.
Okay, this one, this page is more sort of our community facilities. We've got the pools there. So currently we collect sort of 5 to 15% from fees in Turangi. Andrew, what are the current fees for a swim?
Turangi.
Victoria?
$5.50 for an adult. $4.50 to the student. $3 for the child. $3 for a child.
No.
However, children under 5.
That's free.
Free. And the adult is also
Only for local.
only if you're like.
So they ask everybody whether they're local or not.
They do. Yep.
Why do we discriminate on children under 5?
We've made it free for local
Subsidising
space.
people from out of town.
Yeah.
Well, they contribute to our community and
Parents paying the
spend.
bill.
Free, hello.
The local parents are paying the bill.
We need them for our economic base. Contribute hugely to our district. People who
It's under 5.
Anyway, I don't think we should discriminate.
And then at Mangakino,
Can I just, while we're talking about Turangi Falls, I would like also to ask staff to continue to look for sponsors for that pool. We did used to have Genesis there. I know that it went by the by. I don't know why. When we had Mercury in here talking to us, they sort of seemed to infer that the lake has been divided into Mercury in the north and Genesis in the south in terms of sponsorship. So I said to them, would you look at that? And they said, well, we don't really consider it to be our patch. So I think a conversation with Genesis is long overdue, considering the fact that they did used to sponsor us and they don't anymore.
Then the only thing I can think of is that we don't actually use Genesis for the power.
Who do we go?
Who,
Mercury.
Mercury.
We use Mercury.
Yeah. We have our government
But
contract
that's where
is
you
with the
could come
supplier.
in, Sandra, you know, the context here, that's all.
Well, Genesis are 51% owned by the government, the same as Mercury are. There's no difference in the power companies.
National contracts that gives good sharp prices on power for all of that stuff.
So we have a contract with Mercury for all power in the Taupō District
For council stuff.
for council stuff.
Yeah, it's over 2 companies because we have the time of use different to the buildings like this. But yeah, we go every 4 years, we go out and we go through a process under the all of government process, and we choose the sharpest deal for our ratepayers to save our ratepayers money.
That's what that said. So Turangi's missed out because you've gone with another power company. So maybe the conversation has to be had with Mercury in that case.
There's no,
And-
these guys, any elected members, if they've got some contacts in the Genesis, use it.
Don't have
because-
contact. Can we?
No, because they operate in the, it's kind of, I think,
Yeah,
site manager or whatever.
yeah.
I was going to say, perhaps we'll just come back to electricity generators.
Yeah.
Separate
But
conversation.
still, sponsorship is something that I think we should be looking at, definitely for, and it may not be electricity. It might be something completely different. I'll have to think about it. I'm sure you all do. Yeah, yeah.
Mangakino-Pouakani, it's currently 100% rates funded. It's obviously only open during the summer. There's some practicalities around collecting entry fees there. Also, they found that when they had quite low fees, it's not a lot of people going to the pool, but they're lake quite nearby in summer. So they took the fees away, and now it's a much loved community asset. So that's a bit of the story there.
Attendance quadrupled when they removed the fee.
But it does mean that it's 100% rate funded. It's pretty good.
Was it really
And
dead
obviously
cheap?
it's alive.
Was it really dead cheap when it was?
I think it was like $2.
I mean, it made a big difference.
Right next to the lake. Come on, you should.
$2 made a difference.
Only in summer, yeah.
It's open 24 hours. Apparently.
If you jump.
That's what I was saying, don't let them jump in when they empty the pool. Is it?
And then the AC bars, our policy says we'll try and get 35 to 45% fees. And we're currently towards the lower end of that band. So we'll have to have a look at whether or not we try and stay within that band or what we do with fees in that space.
Can I just make a comment, David?
Yeah.
I would like to also impress upon all staff that the reality in the rest of New Zealand is that there are very few pools across the country that are public that actually charge at all. Auckland doesn't charge. I think Wellington, if you've got your card, they don't charge. And there are lots of other pools all over New Zealand that don't charge. So it's just a statement I would like to make, looking to recover costs from fees, from charging families, young children, when actually we want them to use our facilities much more. I still think it's something we should look at.
The facility. People
The big thing is someone's going to pay. So,
Well, how come the rest of New Zealand can do it for free?
It's not our.
It's an interesting question though. I mean, yeah, well, I know Auckland does, but I didn't know anything.
the rates go up.
Come on, Andrew.
Yeah, I think through the chair, I think there are a range of solutions. I think anecdotally, we know folks that charge and folks that don't charge. We can look at that across the country, but ultimately, if this is a decision here, if this gets set here, how much do you want to put on the general rate pay and how much do you want to recover from?
We get a lot of ratepayers that say we don't want to pay for
This is
it,
the
we're
time.
not using them. So that's,
It's a philosophical point of
I
difference.
think it's, it is philosophical, but it's real dollars as well.
And part of it goes down to the considerations we're required to take into account, which are who are the primary beneficiaries. That's clearly the people who go to the pool. And so we're required to consider it, they're the primary benefits should.
I hate to age myself like this, but the first pools in the country that started this were Manukau in Auckland, and that was because of the environment that they were in. And I used to take my children to the Manukau pools, and honestly, it was absolutely fabulous. It was so used by so many people all the time, and it was a great initiative. And I think that was where it started, and lots of other councils across New Zealand have looked at it. So it is something, as David will tell you, that I've been quite passionate about for a long time, that we need to look at rather than increasing. actually going the other way with our pools, keeping them as low as we possibly can.
There are no charge on it.
So just so we're clear, we're not being asked to make decisions on this, that you're just bringing this to us today. And then we'll have the debate about where this sits later on, yeah?
But what's useful is if you highlight the ones you want to have a lot of more information, you want to have a big discussion around. So this is clearly one where we'll wrap up the information and have a bit of discussion
But
around.
just so you understand, if we do that, Turangi ratepayers will pay for the AC bars.
But identified as one to be discussed, that's what we're doing.
Yes.
But they're not targeted rates, it comes from general rates. So it won't be targeted.
Well, I believe the argument is that medical perspective, I imagine that start, well, if you get the kids off the streets and they're in the pools, they'll be making less trouble for everyone else. I mean, that's sort of the mutual benefit for everyone, isn't it?
Well, there was a recognition of an inability perhaps to pay every day, particularly through the summer months, because of course Manukau is away from the beach, not unlike the rest of Auckland, who's quite close to the beach. And I think that had a lot to do with their idea as well too. You went there any day of the summer, it was absolutely packed, and that's been an initiative that's carried on throughout the district.
I was just looking at Facebook and it says 10 visit pass, $57.60 for adults, $6.40 for casuals.
Manukau.
Yeah.
Really?
Moana Nui, Kiwa Pool and Leisure Centre. I mean, the reality is, in the heyday, the cost of pools and everything else was easier to cover. It was a lot, the rules and requirements and staffing and everything else means that most schools in New Zealand have shut their pools because it's too hard and too expensive and too risky. So I don't know if it's helpful to try and, look at the olden days. There's lots of wonderful things in the olden days that were so wonderful, but in the modern day times, everything is freaking expensive. And for me, if you're only paying 15% fees and 95% covering from general rates, that seems, the people will argue that 15% is too low, but I don't think that's too onerous in terms of situation.
I think we could probably come back with some advice on how do our fees compare to elsewhere in the country, and also even how do these percentages compare to elsewhere in the country. That would give you good context.
Because members are up against private operators as well.
That's right.
And we've debated this for years and years and years. Like that, and we've always sort of hit about that thing we thought was pretty fair on the rate card. But then I take it. That's why we made kids under 5 free of charge. Because they can sort of.
But if you don't get privately owned swimming pools, because they're just sinkholes for money, I think.
They're called lakes and
Oh,
beaches.
apart from hot pools, especially.
Well, AC bars certainly it's same sort of thing. Nice hot place to go and chill out.
I remember the old days when we used to debate this very carefully. Every time who owns the rents, every year, you can't do that.
What was his view? What did he
Well,
say?
he's private, it's commercial business, and he was saying ratepayers are probably not paying
Subsidising.
subsidising.
Yeah.
Well, look what he offers something, far bigger and better and bolder and brighter, so which people choose to do, don't they?
This one was better than it.
Well, maybe got the AC bars, they cranked down, so I wouldn't compete with something.
That's right. Anyway.
Okay, we'll come back on that one.
Yeah.
So just through the chair, would be useful to get the absolute dollars as well in terms of the analysis, because I think it's probably a large number.
Because I'm remembering that Tūrangi thing, when I remember the numbers was something like, was only a couple 100,000 was the total fees. So it was like, it's almost as if you wiped that off and made it free. It's not really going to be a, sorry? Oh, 54,000. Yeah. So it's like kind of, well,
What's the AC bars? There's a lot of money in Taupō to be putting on rates for you to make it free.
To be fair to AC bars, they get fees from a variety of sources. There's the interest, there's the hydroslide, there's the private pools, there's the swim classes. So they've got more offering.
Cool.
Taupō Event Centre, Great Lakes Centre, again, we get a reasonably small amount of revenue for people hiring those out, and we have a a different rate for a commercial enterprise who wants to come in and do something commercial versus a community group.
Yeah.
For those. Any further chat about those?
It's a rate. It's a rate. You've got community rate, you've got commercial rate.
That's it.
On what I.
At community halls, very small amount of revenue actually coming from users,
Sell them all.
pretty much provided by RATPAS. Museum and library the same. And then the last one is cemeteries, which is almost entirely coming from fees.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, everyone dies, so.
Yeah, you get into it.
I think the costs are relatively low.
That's a dumb question about cemeteries, please.
Yeah,
So the cost of buying a plot allows, that's the income that we get for perpetuity for mowing it and looking after it. There's no charge, there's no annual charge or anything like that, no. No. In Europe, you buy a plot for 25 years and then after that it reverts back to the local community.
that's cheap real estate.
Well, there's no family, it's a bit hard to collect the bill, isn't it?
No, it's just, it's very cheap, isn't it? $100. What is it? $100 a plot? No.
What's our plot fee?
Andrew?
Yeah, oh, more than 1,000.
100.
Like that.
You just said this recently.
Yeah, we did.
So internments, for a plot, purchase of a plot, food period. The one told this are over $830.
Right.
Cheap.
And then if there's an additional internments,
Not very good, is it?
charge as well for that. So if we re-excavate the site, it's another plot.
Yeah.
Then they get charged for the time of their staff to go out.
So you pay for the interment when you buy the plot?
Yes,
Okay.
you pay for one internment.
One interment, right. Thank you.
Costs of the people that do the internment must go up. So yeah, that's a good deal, isn't it? $850 includes the burial. Even though our burial costs will be going up.
Staff
Yeah, staff costs is,
You might not use it for 2 years.
yeah.
We should buy it now, while it's cheap.
So that's that balance, isn't it, between your public benefit and your private benefit. If we're gonna be 100% private, we'll start to reflect those staff costs and overhead costs into the return.
I'm sure it could have been 50% cemetery. And you could argue that's fine. That's all kind of a bit ridiculous.
Well, I think if you start from the principle, rather than start to think about kind of where you want the figures to land, start from what you believe the private benefit is versus the public benefit. To argue for cemeteries, it's 100% private because I haven't used it yet, but I can.
Yeah. There's no
Yeah.
public benefit
Yeah.
being dead, is it?
No, but we all acknowledge that we want the public, we want our cemeteries to be well maintained and well looked after, and there's an element of public benefit. So we're perhaps trying to stick to the kind of conversation at that level. And that helps in terms of guidance for the team. The money has to come somewhere. You're not reducing costs, you're actually just moving the burden between.
Is there
Maybe, sorry, just gonna say you might be, but one of these things is the incentivization as well.
Yeah.
So, because public cemeteries aren't getting cemeteries, most of my people use private cemeteries. And of course, there's cremation and a whole lot of other stuff. So, if we don't do enough user charges, for example, then people might just.
Yeah, I thought so.
Situation where we just have all these thousands of burials, hugely unnecessarily because of this.
Okay.
Is there any capacity within council to do things like a pilot program? Because the 54,000, I'm back to the swimming pools again. The 54,000 is really a very minimal cost in terms of what comes in from rates across the country. So that's an extra $10 on ratepayers in the Turangi district. Is it possible to do a pilot program for a year or 2 years and sort of see how it goes? So we added $10 to Turangi rates and gave them free swimming pool for 2 years. Do we ever do pilot programs?
So the revenue and financing policy is probably a little bit challenging from a pilot program
Yeah.
perspective, because you would have to kind of set a policy, and then you would have to probably make an inconsistent decision with your policy to enable a trial. So you know, for a public body,
Yes, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
things are a little sticky to be able to change. Look, you could, subject to council decision, obviously go out for consultation with the community about feedback around options and get feedback that way before you set your final revenue policy. But you probably need to come back to you with the numbers first. And you probably need to have a debate on why you're distinguishing Turangi from AC bars from a policy perspective to policy outreaches.
The reason I'm saying it is because we've got the lovely new playground there, we've got the skate park there, and we've got the swimming pool. So we've got a complex really. Plus, of course, we've got the park. So we've got that whole complex there, which is actually being set up to be a really lovely complex and area for young people particularly. And we always have this issue that basically Mangakino and Taupō don't have that. We're not on the lake, quite a considerable distance from the lake. And so it just, you know, and I think $10 once a year across the whole district for something like that. I'd like to continue to explore ideas.
Mangakino convinced us to do it. So you come up with a story and come up with a scenario. What's the process, LTP?
Yeah, so that your process is you today and we come back with some figures basically, and you can have a debate. I suspect Mangakino was slightly different and probably that the cost of administrative fee were outweighing the benefit.
So
And they're only open for 4 or 5 months. And it's just, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just a pool. Yeah, it doesn't have any of the extras that the other 2 sites do.
They don't have,
And it's cold.
thing guards, lifeguards.
Yes, they do.
We have to have lifeguards, yeah.
So when we come back towards the end of the year, you'll see the full costs for everything. And you'll see overall rating impacts for different things. And then you have to make some tough decisions about who's going to take things. The only other thing I want to touch on
Andrew,
is
sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, just a correct.
Oh, good. Okay, it's just the vine of the plot.
830.
Yeah.
And then we pay based on person.
Yeah.
At 0.56 above price they pay the price for actual fee also. Just.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
the only other thing I want to touch on, the last LTP, we tried to set 3 years of fees. So we set a first year with sort of CPI increases. We do have a now finance strategy that will review fees annually to make sure that they're appropriate. And also other fees like dog fees and our Building Act fees. They've got their own legislation, which means we already need to talk to the community about them. Generally, I think the view is that annually adjusting fees is the right way to go, even though it might be we have to consult. But that's something we'll tease through as well.
I just wanted to ask you how many properties in the district defer their rates?
We can get back to you with that.
Is it a number? Like, is it a considerable number, or are we aware?
Can you clarify what you mean by defer the
Well, people
rates?
are able to defer their rates if they can't pay for it, and I understand there's a sort of a legal process where you get rates, a caveat on the property when they die, that sort of thing.
We've got a rates postponement policy again.
Yeah.
No one has taken up.
Oh, fantastic. Fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. That's it for me. Now the fun stuff.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. This one. Oh, come on.
Just to be clear, next step for us is we'll come back with the details and we'll be taking final plans or proposals to consult on.
Thanks, thank you, mate. Right, we've talked about this before, haven't we?
We have.
Last time we talked about this, there was 3 questions that came out of it. Are we going to create further inequities if we create have a rate for short-term home-based accommodation? Is there a robust way to rate, to identify the properties and assess a rate, and what's the cost to administer? So everybody happy with that's what we sort of got to last time when we talked about this, and that was through the housing strategy, and it was Nick and Philip was sitting here, and those 3 questions came out. I don't know, I've been here for a million years, and I just over the years this all has come up. So in 2005 we used to have a market MDR, marketing development rate. It was a separate rate, it was a separate line on the rates account that industrial, commercial and accommodation properties paid. And what we did was we said to anybody that we could identify, we went out through consultation and we said we were going to charge 20% of the marketing development rate, and we were going to charge a 1.2 differential on anybody that was using their home as a short-term home-based accommodation, and that came to council and it got, no, we're not going to do that. We had another crack at it in 2012. We identified a dozen or 20 properties that were high-end short-term home-based accommodation providers, and we ended up on the front pages of the paper as well. The problem what happens is the extent of use. That's the hardest thing for us to find. If we click to the next slide, so what you could do, so for creating further inequities, at the bottom there is determining the extent of use, but that's one of the hardest things if you can find them. So there's, I'll just go off.
Sorry, Tony, just to interrupt.
Yeah.
They're paying extra anyway.
Yes.
Extra issue. What is it? You
Oh, okay, so remember.
Say if you take a Gary Acres base.
Oh,
Yeah, probably not a good example. But a big property that's got a separate usable unit.
Yeah.
They're paying extra anyway.
So we rate on separately used or inhabited parts.
But if they own up to it, of course, not everyone owns up to having that.
Yeah.
That's right, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So okay, you start at the beginning. You go, okay, we need to identify them. Really hard to identify them. There's no easy way. It's searching websites. And then when you do actually think you've found one, you don't get the actual address. So to create a database is really, really tricky. It's very time consuming to find who is using their home as a short-term home-based accommodation. And then if you were to create if you were to create a rate, if you were going to decide to create a rate and charge short-term home-based accommodation, and you were going to use the general rate to collect that rate, then you would be using the capital value. So you still wouldn't, your extent of use, so your capital value is very high, so you're going to pay lots and you don't use it much. So, and we can't find out exactly what your extent of use is. So, yeah, you could use a targeted rate, you could use a fixed targeted rate, so everybody pays the same. We still can't find you though. We could do a fixed targeted rate based on where you are, because you could be saying to us that you're further out you're out in the country, and so you don't benefit from it so much. So some councils around the country have done set targeted rates based on where the property is and tried to find out their extent of use. So how you can find out the extent of use is you could ask them and trust that people are going to, if you can find them, to ask them. And trust that they're going to be honest. One way we could, so the 3 main councils that have gone here, everybody will know, is Queenstown, Christchurch, and Auckland. So Queenstown and Christchurch use their resource consent process, and they're still relying on people being honest. They've still got compliance issues. They've both had to go to court. They've had Court of Appeals. It's a lot of rigmarole. And then Auckland City Council, as you know, they tried to collect their accommodation provider targeted rate for their Airbnbs, and they set that based on how close you are to the city and they had it go different amounts. You paid more if you were close to the city. That only came about because the accommodation providers who were first of all charged with the accommodation provider targeted rate complained that the Airbnbs weren't paying.
So
So
they're
that we-
paying now?
No. So what happened is COVID. So first of all, they couldn't identify everybody. The Auckland City Council, in the media, it's really difficult to find people. It's we can't get everybody, and there's inequities. And then COVID happened, and they pulled pin. And they've been in the court process, and they've won that in the end because they lost, and then they won. And then so now there's talk about what they're going to do from 1 July 2024. But they're still going to be in the situation of who are these people we want to rate.
So was it Auckland rating hotels and motels as well, eh? Is it right? Yeah, it wasn't just a home
Yeah.
base.
Yeah, so it goes like this. So if you wanted to, so what they wanted to do was fund what they thought the accommodation providers has benefited from more. And they created a rate called the accommodation provider targeted rate, and they just rated the motels and hotels. And the motels and hotels complained and said, this isn't very good because other people benefit from what that rate's going to fund, first of all. And then also they said, hey, and this is really bad because there's all these Airbnb properties that are benefiting and they don't have to pay. So that's where all that come from. So what we would have to do, just like Auckland, is we would have to say, hey, our Airbnb properties are benefiting more from, and what we might say is economic development, marketing, and we say, and how much more? So then we would have to decide through the revenue and financing policy, like what we've been talking about this morning, and we would decide, okay, this much money we think these guys benefit more from, because we've come up with an amount, because we might say economic development costs this much, and we think they benefit more by 20%, like we did with the NDR. And so then we got an amount. Then we apply that back to the properties that we think are going to pay if we can find them, and then that makes the rate. And then we would decide, okay, how are we going to set that rate? Is it going to be on their capital value? Is it going to be a fixed targeted rate, or is it going to be a targeted rate fixed but different for where you are in the district and on your extent of use? So, but we would need to find out the extent of uses. We need to ask whoever is providing the rate. And so one way we could do that is we could write to everybody with their first rates, their fourth rates instalment on the 1st of May. We could send something out with the rates notice and say, hey, are you using your property as short-term home-based accommodation? If yes, how much do you use it for? That's one way of doing it. We could we could have gone down.
What about people that advertise? You go that way?
Yeah, and search for them and try our best to find them. That's another way.
Yeah, so in the district currently, there's about 1,500 properties that are listed. The issue with that is that when they're listed, the exact addresses are not given, and even sometimes not even the suburbs given. It's in the Taupō area, and someone booking that accommodation only finds out that exact address after they've basically paid a deposit to turn up. So there's no way for us to readily strip a website for information for where those places are. Someone would have to basically look at the pictures and then look at the map and then try and figure out where this property actually is based on the pictures that are on the website. That's the situation that Auckland finds themselves in currently.
Most people book by email or phone.
I'm pretty sure they book through the website. So they log in through the website, and there's a messaging system built into the likes of Airbnb where the host can directly message someone who's making a booking through the website itself. Yeah. So, and again, Airbnb there's no government regulation that requires them to disclose that information. And even if they had to, I don't imagine they'd have to disclose it to us for privacy reasons. So there was a recommendation from the Commerce Commission around that central government should probably look to beef up the regulations in this space, because right now it puts councils and other authorities in the position where they basically cannot identify who these people are, what properties they are, and who should pay. So that would be something central government would have to make a change in.
Well, yeah, so in your revenue and financing, the policy, the discussion we've already had, you wouldn't get any more money. It wouldn't add, it would just, and who pays would be different.
So what you, going to get back to His Worship's idea last time of just throwing $500 on everyone.
Yep.
The annual fee, rely on voluntarily rather than track them all down, and perhaps that might be so minimal that people would just pay it.
Yeah, so that's a good idea, that could be considered, but when you set a rate, it can't be arbitrary. So at the moment, the ratepayers in our community trust us, they get their rates bill and they know, they can see what it's clear, and they trust us, they have water, they have sewer, they have refuse. If you've got a rate and you're setting it on something that's not verifiable, it's going to make things really, it's going to undermine our rating as we are today.
Oh, I would have thought that's the whole point of this thing. I would have thought this money, however much you get, is targeted at certain things which do benefit holiday makers and that. Like an extra toilet block in Mangakino, or an extra toilet block.
It used to be the MDR rate, marketing development rate. So went to the DGLT.
So that's all and everybody's paying that now. It's in the general rate. So when we went to capital value rating, because we were on land value, and so we went to capital value rating and we changed the uniform annual general charge down to 250, and we put the marketing development rate into the general rate. And so those higher value properties that are possibly being used also for short-term home-based accommodation are paying more, just because that's how it's worked out. If there is a separately used or inhabited part, so they've got a flat that they're using to let out on short-term home-based accommodation, they're paying more because we're rating on separately used or inhabited part.
Chris, I guess a bigger question here is, what is the harm is not the right word. What is the issue we're trying to address in dealing with this? And I mean, I've seen Aaron back there. We've been through this with the housing strategy, and it's really complex. And it's quite funny because I've just got an email from the owner of Bellevue Lodge in Acacia Bay, because right next door to them, when the rugby was on the other weekend, 20 plus young people, he pays all of his fees and charges and has his council inspections, and across the fence is a property being used basically for exactly the same purpose, who pay zero. So they're already inequities. But what I'm hearing, what my understanding is, irrespective of which lane we go down, it's not going to solve the key issue that we're trying to address. So out of all of that, question would be, is there something we can do with the current inequity, not looking at those who are not paying, but those who are paying, and wind that back a bit? So is there anything in that side of the equation we can do?
And so that's what we're going to be looking at through the revenue and financing policy. And what you're saying is that maybe looking at the differential for industrial, commercial accommodation properties and adjusting that, maybe bringing it down so it's fair, so it's lower, or just having a look at that.
Or we use the registration side. So I'm honest, Joe ratepayer. I put my hand up. I'm running a lodge. Like, no bones about it. This is what I'm doing. My neighbour is doing exactly the same thing, but he calls it short-term accommodation. I'm registered on Bookabatch or Airbnb, and you're not getting a cent out of me, but we're both doing exactly the same thing. It's what I call my business, and I'm honest, and the other guy is not dishonest, but he's not paying. And it's kind of, is there another tool in the kit, as a toolbox, that we can lever that playing field a little bit more in favour of those who put their hand up and say, absolutely, this is what I'm doing, but so are they, but I'm paying through the nose.
The likes of that Bellevue Lodge, and they paying the 1.7 differential.
I'm not sure.
I don't know what they're saying, because I haven't gone back to it yet, because it's a fairly terse email.
The differential though is important because your motel, 30 units, is only valued at 4 million. Your house that your Airbnb is valued at $1 million.
Yeah.
So the differential reflects that your valuation, which you would otherwise pay rates on, doesn't reflect your actual use. So we're bringing them back up to the same as what Airbnb is paying for this house. So they're paying a lot for just
Just
like
as the capital value,
it's valued in the bucks.
Yeah.
Motels only valued at 4 million, but they didn't pay. Right, the buildings were just that value. And in terms of your fees and inspections, it's difficult because you got your health, you got fire safety, those sorts of things. They apply because it's got 30 separate units next to each other that need to be safe. It's nothing that applies for a house, same for a house. So it doesn't strike me that there are particular fees that one is paying and the other is should be. It's just complex.
Yeah, I acknowledge it's complex. I'm not sure the analogy is, I 100% agree with that, because we're not talking motel, we're talking a large house running as a lodge with rooms rented out. So I guess you're getting into the detail of the stuff here, and that's where it gets really complex. And I get it. Yeah.
Because there's all sorts of varieties of short-term home-based accommodation. My neighbours down the road, they go out away for the weekend and they let their house out so they can get extra money to live. You know, and then you've got the fancy one that you have to pay $500 a night. But it's all in the same. So to try and fix it, it's hard not to break it.
Kristen?
Look, if I've missed this answer, because I've only just come back, don't answer it, I'll find out later. But have we identified any area that's successfully done this? Has anyone worked out anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world?
Yeah,
A process.
I've read that in Vancouver or somewhere like that overseas, Airbnb will only let you log on with them or put the property with them if you put a council number in it. You've got a specific, council number from the council. And if the council says that you're only allowed to do it for 90 days and then you're a commercial, then if you try and have it on the website for more than 90 days, it kicks you out. So that is there. That's not in New Zealand. Like we talked about how Christchurch and Queenstown have done it through the resource consent system, and how Auckland just did it by searching. They've all been through.
Case, but they still haven't implemented it.
Yeah, well, they did implement it, but they pulled pin on it when with COVID.
Yeah.
And then they haven't reinstated it because they were in that court case. Situation, and they've won the court case now. The rate's valid, but they've still got to come back, and that was just really for the accommodation provider targeted rate, not so much Airbnb stuff.
A couple of quick comments on that. You're right, and there was an article just this week in the mainstream media about Venice and a couple of other cities in Italy who are doing exactly that because of the impact on the same issue we're facing here. No long-term rentals. People can't live in the city because everybody has put their houses on short-term accommodation. And I wonder if we're approaching the issue, which has become a problem, from the wrong end. And we're going to those who are the providers, like the end, mum, dad with a house, as opposed to advocacy at central government level and going to the platforms who enable this, Airbnb, Book a Batch, and whatever. And whether we should be looking at approaching it, just like what you've just said there, approach it from that point of view and go, we're approaching the problem from the wrong side. That would be my view. And is there some way, maybe it's outside of this current conversation, but we need to, widen our approach to this and go, right, the individual owners of properties who are renting them, that's problematic. No one has nailed that. It's like mud wrestling an eel. This just ain't going to happen. Or maybe we go to Airbnb or Book a Batch and go, right, you guys have created this problem, and it is a problem over the entire Western world. If you want to rent, find rental accommodation, maybe there's something there we should be doing.
Problems there.
I like to see it as the one.
Through the chair. No, I mean, I just heard Wayne Brown on a breakfast show thing just a couple of days ago, actually, bemoaning this fact that I can't even get the money out of the blooming Airbnb stuff. So I'm not sure how far they're going to go down that track. But my interpretation of this, because I've kept knowing this for a long time, the point of this whole thing is not just to solve inequity. That was the point of it, is to use money because on holidays this place gets heaving. Well, just like Queenstown, and we're lacking in infrastructure. So that money should be going for infrastructure to solve that issue. I mean, that's the whole point of it, I thought. And in terms of who should pay, well, the best mechanism, I think, but it doesn't sound as doable now. For example, it's a bed tax, and I believe this is how it's done overseas. You know, $5 a night on top of anyone going in B&B or hotel. It's not just home users, but a hotel, a motel, Airbnb, anything. And $5, that's nothing. And if it's everyone has to pay it, then it can hardly be anti-competitive. That's how I read this.
I think the PG, the invoice, tourism tax, bed tax, and local government tax. There's about 4 taxes on the bottom of the invoice when you're paying it.
Sorry. I was just going to say, we have been talking casually about the fact that we can't rely on rates for the rest of our lives. We've got to find another way, and we need income. That is a step. We do need to consider things like a bed tax. We've got to get more money from somewhere. We can't keep relying on our ratepayers. It's just they want so much and they can't have it, and their rates are going up, and there's got to be another way. And I think we should be looking. We need some kind of project that looks at every potential for us to have income from other places. And maybe, Invercargill used to have a flight tax. When you landed, you paid $25 to go to Invercargill. People did it. They paid it.
Yeah, no, good point.
I think just something I've just it's been a little hot item for me for quite some time, but and I appreciate what Tony's saying. It is very, very difficult to actually getting money out of, if you can even locate them all and then charge them. The cost of collection most probably outweighs any benefits of collecting the money. What they've just done in Scotland is, unless you have the new registration, you cannot book your holiday home. So everyone's running around currently registering their houses that they do holiday letting on through whatever system to bring it up. And there's a 6-month waiting list now to actually have your application processed, because I'm trying to book one at the moment. And the woman said I should have it sorted by Christmas time, because she's in a queue now waiting for the government to process that. Once she's got it, she can then go back to Airbnb and lodge it. And so I agree, it's a national.
That's a Vancouver type system.
Yeah.
So you mean registration with the council?
You've got to register that.
Council or government?
You're doing a public holiday letting of any sort, whether it's for 5 days or 50 days, whatever. If you are having public in your house, you've got to comply with health, safety, all of that. Make sure your house is specced up. You then get the registration, which is kept current on an annual basis. So there's fees all the way along the line, but you cannot book that property on Airbnb or which is basic thing.
Yeah, but is that like an Edinburgh Council initiative, or is it Scottish Parliament? Yeah, right.
Where it's got.
So we should be advocating to central
Yes,
government for something to sort something out. Yeah. Because, like Kevin, you've got a B&B, haven't you?
Yep.
You'd be happy paying a bit extra if it was regular.
You seen that of me?
Of
course, I'd be happy to pay it. Absolutely.
Do you feel a bit guilty, all these events, the supercars and all that, we're paying money to get them here and all that sort of thing, and you're benefiting from it, but you're not getting any, you're just paying a mum and dad rate.
There's a couple of points there. First of all, of course, I think central government's slow to do this, but let's face it, this will be going through IRD, so people paying tax on this, and they're not paying tax on it. It's very easy to track them, and I'm sure the government is well aware that it's going through Airbnb and those sorts of things. I was just about to talk about what Ewan stayed in New York a couple of years ago, and you've got to be registered in New York to have any sort of people other than your family staying in the house. So it's a registration certificate. And just trying to think, we went through a website, and my daughter said, are you registered? And oh no, we're not registered because well, sorry, in that case we're not staying with you, it's not registered, because it does come with other things involved in it. So people, one of the other issues as far as Turangi is concerned, it's taken a huge number of rental properties off the market, and it is a serious problem for us down there, because people can get in one night what they're getting for a week on a rental property, and so sort of seems a little bit unfair on our area to take all these rentals. We've got no rentals down there whatsoever. Reason. I mean, I have people contacting me all the time. Do I know of a rental property? Can you help me register? So there's that. The other thing, I know the manager out at Maori Kuritown, he's got 300 batch care properties on his list. So, you know, the registration thing, you know, we maybe see what other people have done across the world. And because actually this area, it affects probably, you know, just about more than anybody in the country really, because we've got so many batches here and we're a destination and an event centre. So, you know, Auckland doesn't have that many batches. Well, Queensland has a few batches, but they all stay in Millbrook down there, don't they? But really, our area, really, this area is probably more acutely affected than any other area in New Zealand. And I'd like to think that when people are coming to the supercars, that they're actually staying somewhere that is registered, that is got a few things like, you know, health and safety and fire alarms and things like that in it. And we're looking after people properly.
There has to be a business case that looks at how much it's going to cost to administer it.
Yes.
Because if it costs more to administer, you know, another responsibility, and if it costs more to administer it, why would you do it? And it could. I mean, I don't know. I don't know until you look.
Go to Vancouver and have a look.
Yeah, okay.
You should go to New York.
Model, aerospace, Scottish model, the Scottish border. But anyway, you know, it could be a set. We should be advocating the central government as to inequities and you know the other.
And in the meantime, we've got to remember that if we were to set a rate, it is a rate. So there's complications that come, there's penalties. So if you're saying, so you're happy to pay Kevin, but the neighbour's not, because he only uses it every couple of twice a year. And so he's refusing to pay, offset the rate. It's the law now. If he doesn't pay, there's going to be penalties. There's a rating sale. There's mortgagee. You know, so there's lots of implications too of setting a rate on something that you can't verify, because you can't actually prove how much they're using it. So if they say, I only use it twice a year, but you know they're not, but I can't prove that anyway.
But just quick, I mean, I suggest we take this offline. We're not going to advance it today, except that we agree it's a national conversation. It's got to be said at central government. I mean, Erin, with the housing strategy, this was debated ad nauseum, and we've actually gone around this hill a few times. But like I say, it's got to be approached from a national level. A bed tax won't happen unless it's set from national government. They'll just stop us doing it. I suggest advocacy is the best way. And it's actually not just about short-term accommodation. It's the impact it has on the housing crisis in the country. You can either change your policy settings by a few degrees to free up some houses, or you can spend millions and millions of dollars building more houses. I know which I'd rather do. You still need to build lots of houses, but if you change your policy settings and free up a whole lot of houses, it saves having to build them to accommodate people who desperately need rentals.
Actually, there's nothing wrong with advocating to DDLT to do the work and ring all these people up and say, would you like to join DDLT for $100 a year or whatever? So they get, you know, because I think a lot of these B&Bs are not paying any extra. You know, see all these events coming, and you know, they're probably quite happy to go on their database and listings and you know, all that sort of thing. Yeah, if I was an DDLT, yeah.
Why would I do that when I'm getting full bookings right now for paying nothing? Where's the advantage?
Be part of a team, a fellowship.
Yeah, no, not doing it for me.
Right? Yeah.
On the contract,
Access all their stats and their information, all that sort of thing.
Excellent, but it's not going to add one more bed night because I'm already at capacity.
yeah, I was going to say on the contrary argument to Kevin is that waiting for the central government to come up with an answer is kind of. But if we can come up with a winning model, a winning formula, and give it a go, yeah, why shouldn't we be the forefront of it? Because you like I was saying, well, we've probably got the most to gain.
Well, we are the most searched destination. See that last month in New Zealand.
No one.
according to DGLT. On Google or whatever, how they do it. Taupō was number one. No one read their emails. Sorry, Tūrangi. All right, have we talked enough, Tony?
Are you not part of?
This is the 27th time we've talked about it.
Yeah.
So what's the general consensus? We just saw a bit too hard at the moment.
Well, can I ask Tony, do you think there's a winning, what's the model with the best chance of success?
So can I ask the question perhaps in a slightly different way, because I think we've been burning it, Andrew and I have been burning, and probably got a similar question, if that's okay. Apologies, Duncan. Apologies, you can tell me if I've got it wrong. So we've sort of talked about there's no model that's perfect. I've got a slightly different view, and that there is a perfect model, but the transaction costs of having that model are massively high, right? So Queenstown, you have to get a resource consent, you have to go through this whole process, and the transaction costs on those on the Airbnb and the transaction costs on the community are outstandingly high. But there is a model. It just would require a lot of work and a lot of cost on the community to be able to achieve that. So apologies, Duncan, I'm hoping I'm not taking over your question. But that's, I'm just kind of saying, because we go round and round and say we can't find the perfect solution. I think what we're actually saying is there's no perfect solution that have transaction costs that we're willing to accept.
Because a lot of those costs are compliance too, and chasing the people that aren't being honest.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So,
And it's the opposite of what we're trying to do. If we're costing our ratepayers more and more and more, that's the absolute opposite.
but I wonder about bringing it to a head, and Tony can tell me off. Is we actually need to bring this back in the paper and almost outline what that is, so that you actually make a decision that's public at some stage through the LTP process.
Should we do a Labour government thing and have a working party?
Yeah, I think there has been a little working party.
I'm just being.
But I kind of feel like we're stuck in a kind of going round and round on this one, and we need to bring it to a head through the revenue and financing policy, through the LTP, to say, we've investigated it, this is what you see the transaction costs are, these are the models, and at this stage in time, the cost benefit doesn't justify going down this route.
But I think it's important that we hear it reasonably regularly, as we have over the years, Tony, as you say, and because it is a moving target.
Yeah.
And it just means that, hey, we're investigating it, we've done it, we're going to wrap it up, and it just won't work under that scenario.
What's the one we got close to, Tony? And then we had all the VMVs of the world came in. What was the one?
That was the 20% MDR and the 1.2 differential.
Right.
We,
On VMV.
it was a different, it was 2005 though. It was way different back then.
I can remember them all coming in.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I asked Yvonne for her list, and I couldn't ask her. It wasn't legal for me to ask.
We had people like Shirley and Gary Akins feeling that they were being targeted when the holiday home list wasn't.
Yeah, it's the same now.
Yeah.
As
That goes to the issue I was going to raise, is that your challenge there is you don't have the ability to compel anyone to hand over the information. So when you asked Yvonne for her list, it wasn't legal to ask for that list. It's the same with batch care. You do not have the ability to ask batch care for their list and say, who is it? And then, so they're not required to hand over that information at all. So and that's where
The government will know it's a business.
the government can legislate that they have to tell us who it is, where it is, and how much, how often they use it.
You just got to bear in mind they are paying extra now, like as in, if you get a resource consent to build a granny flat for your own mum and dad next, attached to your house, you'll be paying two SUPs.
Yes.
SUPs. Two SUPs. So they do, how much is that a year?
You're paying the uniform annual general charge, the $250.
Yeah.
And you're paying a water and a sewer.
Yeah.
And a refuse.
500 or something.
Yeah, that's all, it's over 1,000.
So the counter argument is, so the counter argument is, as Kevin would probably agree possibly, is that, but I can have my people living in there full time, and they're putting as much demands on infrastructure as all these people coming and going. I suppose that's the counter argument, but isn't it? That is kind of the counter argument.
Yeah, separate.
That's a separate issue. I mean, the issue in terms of freeing up rental accommodations, I have a rental and it's a 3-bedroom house and I'm getting X dollars per week. I look at Airbnb or Book a Batch and I can get X times 5 per week for no extra outlay.
Oh,
So-
extra outlay, you gotta clean the bloody thing.
Yeah, well, you do, but that's fine, but
You charge for the cleaning.
I'm gonna make $400 a week or $2,000 a week. What are your odds on that?
And then the government are going to legislate under the Tenancy Act that you will have to do this, this and this and this.
Yep.
So that chips off the.
Residential Tenancies Act doesn't apply. I'm on Airbnb. Thank you very much. All the way to the bank. Seriously.
So that's what we're trying to do. I'll leave it with you.
Tourism.
$500 a year, it's gonna change.
You know, we should say, we have a recommendation on the screen, which is we just have to keep an eye on the state of play. The reality is we do need some sort of policy direction, whatever we want to use from central government. And yeah, but just some of the stats we had, I think earlier in the year, there's only 17% of houses is being used. These Airbnb. That's not too bad. So we're far from a perfect, equitable situation. But no matter what we do, it's still not going to necessarily change that. I think the recommendation above makes sense to me. That's the way.
Who's the minister that looks after that?
Well,
Tourism? Yeah.
So
When the time comes, you know, like we're in Wellington, it's an issue for us. Who would be the minister responsible for any legislative change?
Could be revenue minister.
Yeah, you'd be across multiple ministries with it, I'd imagine, because any change in the Airbnb market would then have negative externality effects on the tourism industry, for example.
Yes.
So tourism would want to be involved, housing would want to be involved, Ministry for the Environment potentially is going to want to be involved, depending on a range of different effects. So you've got a number of people you'd have to talk through to get that across the line. Because obviously
that's why it's highly unlikely, because they won't do anything to reflect on.
Scotland have done it, Vancouver have done it, so there must be something that done it.
York.
Hey?
I'll just, I can send it to you. I mean, York has actually done it very, very, very carefully. They've divided up their areas into high areas that are very high. And, you know, people want to go to, and they've got 3 different areas. So you can be in a lesser area, and you pay this. I mean, I'll send you the stuff. It was very interesting though, being there and actually seeing it, because they have certain requirements and say, you must provide, you must provide, you must provide. You must be registered, but you must provide, you must provide. So they've got into it and you know, sort of covered the bases. Julie, sorry.
Well,
I interrupted.
I think it comes back to Andrews, unless the legislation changes or unless you're willing to require resource consents, no one's compelled to give you that information.
And to be very clear, those jurisdictions have different legal structures in place that enable them to do it, and local government in New Zealand is pretty constrained in its ability to make legislation comparatively to somewhere like New York. New York, being a state within the United States, has significant freedoms to create local legislation above and beyond what we can do with a bylaw, for example. So they're far more empowered to make sort of quicker or more local responses to those issues. But in that context, you know, New York as a state is 4 or 5 times the size of our entire country. So it's, you know, they're operating as a state of the United States, but they're behaving more like a national level government in that regard.
The local government association ever, they have.
It's on the list in terms of advocating for it. So, yeah. And through the Future for Local Government, we're having conversations about funding, so we can bring it up through there.
From them, yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm a good organisation.
Yeah, we're back down there in November to have another conversation.
Right, I'll get the message to move on. Don't, anything else?
No.
That's it?
Yep.
You lead off for another year.
Oh,
That's part 1.
yeah.
Part 1. Not quite off.
Okay.
Thank you.